I want to see peace in Palestine um, very much. And
أستاذنا، أود أن أسألكم حول الصراع الفلسطيني الصهيوني الذي يمتد لأكثر من 75 عاما، ونحن نشهد هذه الحرب الدامية المأساوية وهذا الاعتداء الوحشي الظالم الإجرامي من قبل الكيان الصهيوني على العزل والأبرياء والأطفال والنساء في فلسطين، والذي يدمر كل ثقافتهم وتاريخهم وحضارتهم وأبنيتهم، والأهم من كل ذلك الإنسان فيهم. كيف تنظر إلى هذه الحرب، خصوصا وأنك متخصص في دراسة الحال المجتمعات العربية والإسلامية وأمضيت عقودا في هذا المجال؟
Yeah, first of all, let me, this is important, and I'll probably speak about it more than I've had an opportunity, in the past. The killing of civilians, whoever does that, is absolutely wrong. Okay, so if we're talking about, what happened on the 7th of October and some of that is absolutely wrong, and it needs to be addressed. But the issue is, when you're talking about the Palestinians, you have a people that, with the Nakba, were driven out of their villages, etc. You have the taking over, basically, and creation of an expansionist country. And so when you go from the West Bank, to Gaza, and somehow we don't capture it enough. President Biden and Blinken, first of all, I think Biden and Blinken, I voted for President Biden, but Biden and Blinken, I think, have been terrible when it comes to their general policy and handling of the Middle East. But certainly his first and a number of his statements, initially it had to be pointed out to him that he wasn't talking about the Palestinians. Okay, so you have a certain number of Israelis who were either killed, captured, being held. Okay, and then you have this enormous number of people who, as much as 15,000 and maybe 4,000, 5,000 children who've been slaughtered. There's no justification for that. This is genocide. This is something that that the UN has denounced, that more and more countries, to an incredible degree, have announced that the prime minister in Spain said he would. He denounced it and also said he would recognize Palestine as a country, even if that hadn't happened politically yet. And it's part of an endemic problem that we've had, and that is that many people have really, the average person, known very little about the Middle East, very little about Islam. But for many Americans, they would know Christianity or Judaism. That was that's always been my experience. They have no idea the history. Who are the Palestinians, and especially now, these kinds of statements that I'm going to refer to have been made before, but are being made a lot now, in which people talk as if this whole area that the Israelis govern, they're the only real citizens and they have a right to this area. And you see it's playing out with settlers, who are attacking Muslims, taking over their homes or their land. You can't, in the middle of this crisis, and we're in a pause period, but we know that Netanyahu and this very religious right group that he has in his cabinet, intend and continue to use the kind of approach that sees itself as able to wipe out, and in the process of wiping out Hamas, to in effect be bombing hospitals, mosques, churches, and killing the thousands of people I'm talking about. So there's an incredible disparity between the capture of Israelis, etc. And again, any kind of violence or killing is out. Okay, but there's a disparity between that and the enormous number, the thousands and thousands that have not only been killed, but the thousands upon thousands that have had to leave, their home yet a second time, or maybe a third time in generation, and go where? And we see, they have to walk for hundreds of miles. Some of them. There are all kinds of issues with regard to food and water, and unfortunately, media does. There are stories about what's happening there, but if you look at the proportionality still leans one way, and so you don't really see even responsible people, university presidents, etc. Some speak out, but others, if they speak out, they will talk about anti-Semitism, but not Islamophobia, and what that means in terms of how people then can look the other way at this destruction that's taking place, in Gaza, and forget that indeed it was around 2006 or so. You had an election in which actually Hamas as a political party came in, and the Bush administration, for example, before it had said that if Hamas won, they would accept it, and they did not accept it, and the British didn't accept it. And so it's continued to be under Trump. Trump made it even more of an issue. Moving the embassy, saying that he would stop the immigration of Muslims, and doing it within the first 2 weeks, attempting to, shut down. And he's actually announced that he would do it again, and other such things. And if you look at members of his cabinet, so all of this then enables the kind of thing that we're seeing playing out now. And I think at the end of the day, unfortunately, thousands more people will be killed. But I do see it as something, as far as I can tell, and from reports, I think people forget that indeed there are many Palestinians who support Hamas as a political movement, and see that as the one movement that's stepping forward. I think that what some of the members of Hamas did, some of that was ill-conceived, but I think that what they wanted to do in terms of how they actually executed what they were doing, but what they did accomplish, I think, is to basically make the world more aware of, and therefore we see leaders in the international community. Who knows what they'll actually do at the end, but they've become aware of the fact, many of them, that they've had to denounce, the occupation. They had to say that there needs to be a Palestinian state, whether it's a two-state solution or a one-state solution. But it's just tragic.
مفيد جدا أستاذنا، وما يحصل من اعتداء وظلم وحشي يفوق كل تصور، وبعض المحللين السياسيين كانوا يقولون أنه يفوق عدة مرات القنبلة النووية التي أسقطت على هيروشيما وناكازاكي وما شاكل. يعني تخيل حجم الظلم والاعتداء والإجرام والبطش والوحشية. وأيضا الذين يقارنون، حتى إذا نتحدث عما فعلته حماس في 7 أكتوبر، فهو لا يمكن مقارنته أبدا بحجم هذا يعني الاعتداء الوحشي الذي يتزايد مع الأيام.
The thing is, you can't justify the kind of slaughter that has taken place and will continue to take place, the magnitude of it, and the fact that most of the people that they're killing are going to be non-members. They may support Hamas, but not even, the vast majority of people are just innocent citizens. I think that one thing I would say, but I said it earlier, but noted that who knows what these countries will do. It has been phenomenal, the number of countries that have denounced the excessive violence that's taken place. A number that have pulled their embassies out, or just really strong statements basically calling for a ceasefire, or that level of criticism is there. But the question does become, when we get back to after this period, how do they approach the Middle East? How will they have in perspective a very strong realization and need to move and support the idea of a Palestinian state, or will we go back to a situation where Israel enjoys pride of place, as it were, or when it comes to Middle East policy of many countries, including the United States, certainly the United States, but also Britain, France, Germany.
إلى أين يتجه العالم بخصوص هذا الموضوع؟ هل هناك من أمل في المستقبل الآن بعد نهاية هذه الحرب؟ هل ستتجه الأمور خصوصا في الإعلام الغربي والرأي العام العالمي ومشاكل من أمور؟ كيف تدرسون الموضوع أنتم؟
I think that what you have with media is not, certainly media from my point of view has been biased in its approach, and there are studies on that in terms of the coverage of the Middle East and in terms of, let's say, Islam in particular. For media, and it's not just media, but the notion of if it bleeds, it leads. And internationally, that's the way media functions, whether they're talking about Palestine or Israel or disasters that are taking place here or there. I would say that the coverage of media has been disproportionate, but a significant number of media and media stories do deal with the realities. I mean, emphasizing not just the killing, etc., but also writing about, who's behind this, the kind of positions that are taken, and revisiting Israeli policy in terms of the areas that they have occupied. And more recently, for example, the extent to which, in the West Bank, they've opened it up to settlement, etc. I think all of that is there. I do think that, as I said earlier, many countries have, for whatever reason, spoken out against the excesses. We also do see emerging now media stories that do talk about how at times the Israeli, people want to always say, well, you can't believe what Hamas says, etc. Okay. Well, more and more in general, when it comes to, for example, the statistics on deaths, etc., Biden had to back away, and UN and others have said that in general, their kind of reporting is been spot on. I think that we'll continue to see that, but it's clear that, well, it's not clear how far Israel's going to go, but at least for all the statements that they're making, and for Netanyahu himself, he has to respond to members of his cabinet, the real right wing, because otherwise he would never be elected. And I think that's going to be his situation. And so for him, he is going to do what they want and what he would like to think will turn everything around by being this hero that wipes out Hamas. Okay. And therefore it justifies the way in which they, bomb hospitals, etc., and the numbers. I do think, we don't know how that's going to turn out, but I do think that this whole issue of Palestine and Gaza and the extent to which at times when some stories are out there, they wind up talking about the blockade of Gaza, which people just forget about. I mean, we're into the second decade, well into the second decade. And what are the implications of that blockade? So you have, in terms of disease, in terms of, poverty, etc. I think that there'll be more of coverage and awareness, but I don't know the result. I can tell you that, and I've mentioned this in a lot of my public talks over the years, that when I got my degree, there was no interest in Islam. But when I got my degree, when it came to Palestine and Israel, my attitude was that I felt sorry for Middle East experts who worked on Palestine and Israel for decades and then were retiring, because it was like physicians who worked on a cure for a disease and never found that cure. But I knew surely in my lifetime that would change. And I remember talking to somebody who had been a senior member in a previous American administration, who's roughly around well, he's a little younger than I am, but roughly around my age. And he said he had had the same attitude. And he was an international, diplomat, etc., So I now say to myself, look at all the years that have gone by. In the 1990s, it looked like something was going to happen. Now you're seeing this unbelievable disaster. I just don't know. I gave a talk recently to an organization that I had been the initial keynoter when they created the organization 20 years ago. And so I gave a talk, and then I wasn't necessarily just focusing on the Middle East, but at the end I addressed Palestine and Israel, and I said exactly what I said to you. And I said, so, I was so sure if you invite me back 20 years from now for your 40th, it'll be done. I'll be 103, but I'll still be around to make sure that it happens. This is the situation of Palestine and Israel is, and its history. It's almost, I think of it as almost impossible for somebody that would initially come to it and be able to appreciate just what the realities have been in that history, okay, with in terms of policy, etc., and the disproportionality of the coverage. So for example, in the last decade or so, you've had 3 times when the Israelis have really sort of gone in a very big way, and then in between they're going in, etc. And the reality of it is that in these confrontations, again, thousands of Palestinians, and that's the real thing. The thousands are not what they want to say, that they're all, all those thousands are somehow Hamas extremists or whatever. Thousands of people have been killed. And yet when media reports come out sometimes, that it'll be a proportionality in which you may have, 25, 50, or maybe push a little bit more than that of Israelis who tragically die in the confrontation. But then on the other side, when you look at what's happened Palestine and the kind of bombing and everything that has happened during that period of time, the proportionality is just way out of whack. And there's something about that past history and then how it affects people's attitudes. I think things are beginning to change in America, but there's still issues. I remember speaking to a member of Congress, and he said that we should speak out a lot. And there are times when we've had people who were in the Senate or Congress and had established records, and then took a policy on Israel that some didn't like and lost their office. But he commented that he would make a statement and then he'd get on the elevator with his colleagues. And as soon as the doors closed, many of them would say, I wish I could say that. But if I say it, I probably won't be reelected. So it's very much is something ingrained, in our society. And that lack of knowledge, I think, is beginning to change significantly, because we do have now, unlike, again, when I came in, you did not have a large number of people who had any training or exposure to the Middle East in their education, or even back then in the media. And then when the media came, take something like the New York Times. There was a recent situation where a Pulitzer Prize winning author who wrote for them accepted the award, but then also said that she wouldn't write for them anymore. And in the course of what she wrote, she talked about the extent to which at times their Arab journalists are treated equally as others. So this runs very, very, very deep. And for politicians in many countries, it runs very deep.
Very beneficial. Professor, what do you personally hope for the people of Palestine and Gaza, and how do you hope their future should be?
Well, I think that it's to I risk saying it can be to dream and an impossible dream in terms of the proximity of what I'd like to see. one would hope that it might be possible, especially if the Israelis keep doing what they're doing, and it's terrible what they're doing. But if they, if they get back to bombing and et cetera, that it will be a situation where there'll be far more of a reaction, both internationally and domestically. We see that in terms of some of the major organizations, not just human rights organizations, but as I said before, the UN and other organizations speaking out, but also the demonstrations in some capitals. You look at the demonstrations that have occurred in London, in Washington, et cetera, and the numbers of people who've turned out are incredible. Another factor that's playing out in the United States is that you have a group like Jewish Voices for Peace. And these are Jews who are committed to there being an Israeli state, but they're also committed to Palestinian rights, to a Palestinian state, or to Palestinians with full rights, etc., and speaking out, and are being criticized by establishment American Jewish organizations. And a lot of there were studies that have been done that a lot of the younger generation of American Jews, many of them, on when it comes to the situation in Israel and Palestine, are more and more distancing themselves, not only from the policies, but really a very good public speaker is Peter Beinart, Beinart, and who has in fact developed over the years to the point where he has been outspoken in criticizing and condemning Israeli policy even before this. And there are a fair number of some of the surveys of American Jews who aren't as singularly committed, to Israel. It's a significant number that many are concerned about, and that's why some American Jewish groups are accusing people like Jewish Voices for Peace and those that support the boycott, BDS, of not being, not being good Jews, that they've gone astray, etc. So I think there will be movement, but how much that movement will be is hard to say. But I certainly think there'll be now. It's not the same, but if you take an analogous case of South Africa, think about all the years that Mandela was in prison. Think about all the people that were killed, and then at a certain point, something happened and there was a movement. And I think this is at a negative level, this is a horrendous situation. But I think out of this horrendous situation may well come a significant number of people, whether they're people in government or certainly citizens, etc., that more and more realize what really needs to happen and what is happening.
بطبيعة الحال أن الشعوب الصامدة والمقاومة والصابرة والتي تسعى لتحقيق أهدافها ستصل في نهاية المطاف وإن طال الزمن، وهكذا نرى في الحركات التحررية والنهضوية والمقاومة في شتى أصقاع العالم.
I think so, and I think that certainly, all Israelis are going to be concerned about what's happened in Israel, but you have a large number of Israelis who are critical, of what's happening, are critical of the government, and we see them. We see a number of responsible journalists who write, and then some of them that there's a real strong pushback, but who write very honestly and very, very frankly. I've attended a number of talks here of Israeli journalists, or if you will, Jewish journalists, whose position with regard to Israel, what's going on now, but also with regard to the long term in terms of a Palestinian, state and Palestinian political and civic, rights, etc., there are a significant number that just realize that this has to happen. That it is legitimate to say that Israel is an apartheid state. It is legitimate to say that Israel is now committing genocide. That's just a reality. It's describing a reality. You see that the extent to which this whole idea of bringing together a number of Arab and Muslim governments and Israel under the rubric of Abraham, the Abrahamic, one has to look very closely at that. I think there's a political agenda that's just very clear, and it's a political agenda that the Israelis have taken advantage of, and I think, and also in the U.S., it's a political agenda that was blatant during the Trump administration, and a political perspective that also has been very much, sadly, seen in the Biden-Blinken administration. Whether it's the way they handle the policy towards Iran, but also just in general, the way they approach the Middle East and the kind of partners that they have, the way they approach Israel. The extent to which Biden, it took a while before I think Biden realized that politically, if for no other reason, he had to start talking about the Palestinians, because that wasn't occurring. And then half the time when they would say something, it always privileged Israel and not the Palestinians. So as I said, in his early statements, he almost never referred to the Palestinians, or when he did give a whole talk about how many people were killed, in Israel, by a faction of Hamas, etc. He wouldn't talk about what was happening to the Palestinians. We've got the same problem also, though, in the U.S. If you follow the U.S. on many campuses now, you've had a reaction on the campus by younger people, concerned about what's going on in Palestine and Israel. But you've had situations where you've had the heads of even prominent universities banning certain Palestinian, let's say, youth group on campus. So this is a problem. We bring our history to it, and very much. And so, for example, you could get a cross section of Americans my age, 10 years younger, 20 years younger, but it would still prove to be a cross section. You know what I mean? You can get people who disagree with me 100%. To a degree that you can't. You're just amazed at times. The kinds of emails that I used to get, and I still get from people in a variety of ways, the kinds of questions they ask, or the kinds of, at times, the kind of threats that they articulate. It's not just for myself. It's for a lot of other people, and it's become, right now, Palestine and Israel is a very hard politicized issue, playing out both in the governments, how government leaders speak, let's say the heads of governments, but also how their parliaments or how our Congress ultimately, responds. But again, you see it in our society with the large numbers of turnout that even when they try to ban it, you would wind out with these incredible numbers of people that were turning out in the streets, to criticize Israel and to call for, not only peace, but a Palestinian state ultimately. So I think that, there is like that kind of movement, and this horrendous situation, which for Israelis, Israeli citizens, for some of them was horrendous, and for an incredible number of Palestinians has been horrendous. I hate to word it this way, but it may have created a new wave of people who now see the issue of of Israel and the Palestinians in a different light, who've now become really aware of, the level of devastation and how one can try to justify that. When the Israelis say, "Oh, we're very careful about where we bomb," and you killed 15,000 people, so what does careful mean there? And they have, for example, apparently killed a number of senior people. But I can remember another time in which there was this kind of conflict in the past, where either a scholar or a reporter said, "Gee, Hamas must be an organization of people who are heads of the organization." In other words, every time somebody was killed that was from Hamas, it was another Hamas leader was killed. Not another Hamas member may have been killed, but a leader. And I think that out of this, I think some good will come, but that good will not come for so many Palestinians and what they've been through and what they will still have to go through. And what the Israelis, if and when they decide that they've achieved their goal, how they're going to wind up, treating the area and the Palestinians. I mean, it's you cannot correct or repay what they have done to Palestinians, not especially, forgetting that for many who've been in Gaza, this is now, if you look at their family tree, the second or third time they have been driven out of an area and have to start all over again. Is the international community going to respond to this really in an overwhelming way economically? I doubt it. I think that there will be a response, and I think there are people that are stepping forward in responses, but this is something of a magnitude that, for example, South Africa was not, in terms of the consciousness of the West. For a good deal of U.S. history and also European history, that apartheid state existed. And, it was only later on. In fact, if I remember correctly, after Mandela was freed, and then after Mandela was elected the head of state, at our end in the U.S., they had to move quickly because he was on a terror list. And you have a whole process for getting the name off it, so that they don't. So I think that, there may be light at the end of the tunnel, but the tunnel is, on the other hand, it may be that the train is coming right at us again.
هنا اسمح لي أستاذنا أن أتطرق إلى موضوع قريب، وهو يتعلق بالبحث السياسي والواقع السياسي في الشرق الأوسط، وهي الحادثة التي نحن على أعتاب الذكرى الثالثة لها في بداية 2020، لعلنا الآن الذكرى الرابعة لها، وهي حادثة اغتيال قاسم سليماني. كيف تحللها وكيف تنظر إليها في سياق الصراع بين العرب والمسلمين من جهة والكيان الصهيوني من جهة أخرى؟
I think it's naive and absurd. I mean, the reality of it is, whatever Soleimani was like, or did, you don't. If you, the Israelis have used this a lot. If you use assassination as a tool, an assassination that takes place in other countries, not even that doesn't accomplish anything. It will be seen by even people who may not, Iranians, who may not support their government, but would just say, would feel, look, wait a minute, what's being communicated here is that anytime Israel feels this, that it needs to do something, it can send somebody in and commit this kind of action. Or it's the problem that we have with U.S. policy when you look at the way in which we rationalized going into Iraq, and then stayed and occupied it for so long, and in other places, when you do those kinds of things, and people wind up getting killed in the process, you kill one person's leader, then what do you expect? The other side is going to be tempted to say it's got to do something, but in the international arena, if they do something, it's always a terrorist act. But if Suleiman is killed, that's not a terrorist act because you're killing a terrorist. That part of where we are is amazing when you consider how long modernity and the modern world has existed. That we still have countries that do what they do. See, if Israel does some of this stuff, they're not a rogue state. If it comes from the other side, they are a rogue state. I can remember being in a public forum with Bernard Lewis in New York. It was and it was at the main store, which was almost like a library of a chain, a big chain bookstore, and in the conversation, it was clear each of us was supposed to talk about our book. Okay, I had a book called, I guess it may have been The Islamic Threat. I'm not sure because there've been a lot of these books, and he had one called What Went Wrong. Okay, I once did an interview on PBS, and I said, with regard to that book, Bernard Lewis went wrong. That's what went wrong, not a lot of what he said. But I remember in that meeting, Lewis at a certain point said that it might be necessary, or that a policy, if we couldn't find weapons of mass destruction, then a policy that one might pursue is to, in the name of democracy, go into Iraq and then establish there. And then if it was necessary, then you might want to consider the US going into another country. That is, that kind of suggestion actually was what happened only a month or two later in the Bush administration. And Lewis did have influence, or at least had somebody who had admired his thought and interacted and brought him to Washington, and that was the vice president, who had a strong influence, Cheney. So I think that again, we're going to have to move beyond that, and that means that we have to, for example, be more realistic about what went wrong when it comes to the Arab Spring. And what went wrong was the politics, of some governments that wound up supporting, before the coup even occurred, some Arab governments, a coup to get rid of the democratically elected Muslim Brotherhood government. Okay, whatever the issues might have been with Morsi and what some of his policies were, there was no justification for then what happened after it. And the tens of thousands that were in prison and still in prison, and those that have been condemned to death, but in fact they have not been. Some of them have not been executed, but they have to live with that, and they're out of the country. They don't have a citizenship. It's we're still living, with those kinds of ramifications. And I think so. The images, very often in scholarship, people talk about neo-colonialism, okay? And very much, obviously, in those countries that were colonized, for many of them, that's precisely what they want to do, is not only criticize the colonization of the past, but how there's still a colonization mentality that exists and plays out in terms of politics, economics, etc.
شكرا أستاذنا. نعم، بحيث لا يوجد إنسانية، أخلاق، فضائل، قانون دولي، دين، حينما يأتي الأمر للحديث عن السياسات الغربية التسلطية والاستكبارية التي تتحكم بالشرق الأوسط. ومن المؤسف جدا أن أغلب الحكومات العربية هي تابعة في قراراتها وليس لها أدنى استقلال في القرار السياسي وما شاكل، وكأنك ترى أن الدول العربية هي بمثابة سفراء لتلك الحكومات الغربية وعلى رأسها أمريكا.
Yeah, I think we missed the fact that in a number of countries in particular, they're actually, while they maybe outwardly seem very sort of modern and etc., if you actually look, the one thing that people don't have is political rights. And that lack of political rights means that you're working in a country where if everything goes well for you and your family, that's fine. But if for some reason somebody doesn't like you, then you're out. I remember once having one of my former students from a different university, but he was associated with the Ministry of the Interior in an Arab government. Now, in the United States, the Ministry of Interior it means the interior of the country. They're concerned about our trees, our et cetera, you know. So when we landed in his country, as we were passing along, he'd identify and he said, and that's our Ministry of Interior. And there was a pause and he said, and I would get very nervous if I were invited to go there. And my first reaction was to think as an American, you know, I thought, interior? You know, what does he mean? You know, what does he mean? And I think that still is missed in a number of countries that can look very modern when it comes to domestic politics. Then it means we can be very modern, but you don't question the authority and the chain of authority. And I think that often is lost sight of because you have long relationships between countries and it's accepted whoever is in, you know, et cetera, but often we don't look closely enough and say, well, in some of these countries, it's still an issue in that you can't have a political party, that you can have in some countries an Islamic political party, or, you know, or even social services that are somehow run by, you know, an Islamic organization.
كيف يرتبط الأمر والواقع الذي نعيشه بفلسفة الحداثة والفلسفة السياسية للغرب؟ يعني نريد أن نحلل الموضوع بشكل أعمق أيضا.
Yeah, I think it's a little more complicated than that. I think that the problem with modernization and development theory was, as one famous scholar said in his book, that Muslims in the Middle East had a choice between Mecca or mechanization, okay, or modernization. It's modernization theory in general said, well, religion could exist, but that should be in private life. But religion in politics and society, you know, should be invisible. So, you know, what you then had is you could have countries where you had a large number of people who were devout, who are, you know, religious people, but in terms of government policies, the whole idea with government or one of the critical ideas has been, to what extent does human rights play a role in policy? Now, you see, with Jimmy Carter, it did. It did in everything that he did as president and when he wasn't president. For a lot of other administrations, it's not that they would say that they deny human rights, but in fact, if you're talking about what do you privilege politically, it's your country politically, its stability, its, you know, advancement, etc. And so it's you know, an idea that really doesn't look at not just the religious but the ethical dimension. You know, I think, you know, if you look at Henry Kissinger's life, a brilliant man who just passed away at the age of 100, who had many different positions. But you look at some of his approach and the policies, you know, a good deal that you would get. There's a common phrase that used to be said just in the US, not just, I don't mean among academics, I mean just, you don't mix religion and politics. You see, well, you may not want to mix religion and politics, but if you're talking about the idea of values of human rights, etc., okay, whether they're religiously embraced or non-religiously embraced, okay, you've got a significant number of people who think that way, and you have politicians, you know, a number of them that think that way. But what does that mean in terms of the actual political culture? Okay, you know, how progressive, you know, can one be? And you know, very often when people will look at administrations, they will say, and certain policy decisions, they'll wind up saying, well, in general, looking at this administration, human rights was always subordinated to political and economic interests. You know, absolute subordination to political and economic interests. And I think that has been a problem. Now, on the other hand, what we now have is often in Europe and America, certainly America, a religious right, the far right, as it were. Okay, a lot of evangelicals and others are far right who support somebody like Trump. So there, you see, you'll have people like myself and others say, this is not where religion should be. In the way that they're doing this, religion is being used in the wrong way. If you look at a number of the people who were in the Trump cabinet and their attitudes when it came to the Middle East and when it came to, Islam, etc. If you look at, in general, the policies in the United States, you in the U.S. you will have people who, despite the public life that Mr. Trump had, what he said, did, what he's been guilty of, whether it's in his finances or in his personal life, they're willing to vote for him because he espouses beliefs that they have. And therefore they bypass the real person, you see, because what they will say is, as one believer, I read a document that somebody wrote, and the first paragraph was, clearly there are a lot of issues with, Donald Trump in terms of his personal life, etc. But then the person said, in effect, we all know that God can move in mysterious ways. And then that moved to the idea that, and then Trump's position on X, Y, and Z is actually something that we believe should be integral to society, and therefore we support him. That's when you have a problem. But when they say it, most people, now I do know people who will say, I don't care about other people, whether it's domestically in our country in terms of poverty, etc., or even internationally. But for a lot of people, what we do as human beings is, when you were asking me about questions of belief, etc., what we do as human beings is individual human beings and then groups, whether it's mosques, churches, synagogues, etc., depending on who the religious leader is, they naturally are going to interpret these principles, and sometimes they come out on the on the wrong side. And so you see that, for example, when you see the Pope, this latest statement that just came out, that the Pope apparently sent a message to the president of Israel, that clearly was drawing a line, but by and large, what we do as human beings in a healthy way, but it also can then also be another problem, is we often will rationalize, what our ultimate beliefs are, and sometimes not be on really important issues, not be as informed as we should be. So you get people who vote on mega issues for a candidate, but in fact, they're impressed with maybe the way the person comes across in a debate, but it's not like they really see all the implications, and so many people don't care, and they'll say they don't care about religion. I don't think about what God wants or not. But there are lots of people who will say that they believe in God or that they have a strong religious tradition, but then they wind up developing a rationale for the bin Ladens of the world, the ISIS of the world, and the people that we have in the U.S., who are anti-Semitic, Islamophobic. It's just it's also part of the human condition. I think what we need to do, and I think some places are speaking out more and more. For example, I think I mentioned it earlier, but if I didn't, at many universities now, you have faculty and students, not all faculty and students, but coming out with very strong statements on Palestine and Israel. And certainly Georgetown has seen those coming out, and many universities speaking out on these issues, getting involved in demonstrations, but both on campus and off campus. There's far more of that, I think, taking place. And but you can actually go to this church or that church, this synagogue or that synagogue, or maybe even at times on some issues, this mosque or that mosque, and realize you've got people who see themselves as strong believers, but who create a situation. I was at a Muslim wedding, and I was sitting next to somebody. This is quite a few years ago, and he was telling me how his father, when they came from the Muslim world, created a mosque, and how now had been passed into the family, but how he felt that he was going to have to leave that community and establish another mosque. I said, why? Why are you saying that? He said, when you have two children who are in the early 20s and they come home and say, Dad, I cannot go to that mosque and listen to the kind of khutbahs that the imam is giving. In other words, his religious position, you see? And we had that division within Catholicism, within, with all religions, on issues of war and peace, on issues of sexuality, on issues of, abortion, diversity and pluralism are good things, and freedom is a good thing. Where it becomes a problem is that's why you have to have try to build in a form of government that enables representation, significant representation of people in terms of their voting rights, etc.
نعم، من الواضح جدا أن ظاهرة الشذوذ أو المثلية الجنسية الآن هي مسألة مطروحة في الغرب، وخصوصا في أمريكا، والآن يعني يفرضونها على الطلاب والمدارس والمناهج بشكل يعني تعسفي جدا، وهي قضية كبيرة ومثيرة للاهتمام. فما رأيكم؟
Yeah, and among people, I have people that are good friends, and in every way, they're very progressive. They care about the poor. And they themselves aren't that wealthy, but they do all these things. But they feel passionately about, for example, gay rights, of homosexuality. They just, and they don't want that topic taught in school. Now, some will say they don't want it in the early grades. In other words, if they go to high school or college, that's different. But in the early grades, so we're having this, and in fact, we have the broader problem in our country, which exists in many authoritarian regimes. But now you've got a broader problem here, where you have governors appointing people who then attempt to redefine the nature of education and what can be taught and not taught, and making lists in some states of books that should be taken out of libraries, books that in the past high school and college students read. So, this is, now if that happened in certain, let's say in certain Muslim countries, and it does, but, some of the people here would be saying in another context, do you see, there isn't really real freedom here. Look, they're trying to define what's read and not read, but now when a certain issue becomes a hot issue, many people who say, I believe in absolute democracy, but not on this issue.
في ختام هذا الحديث المفيد والشيق، أود أن أسألك عن حكمتين تذكرهما دائما وتستشهد بهما. الأولى مرتبطة بالعدالة وقيمة العدالة، وأن على الإنسان أن يتخذ المواقف العادلة ويأخذ ويدافع عن المظلومين والمستضعفين، وأن يعني يسجل موقفا أمام الظالمين في هذه الحياة الدنيا. والثانية تتعلق بمقدار الشجاعة التي يتحلى بها الفرد في المواقف أيضا الحساسة، وأن يتخذ موقفا شجاعا دوما إذا تطلب الأمر. حبذا تشرح لنا علاقتك بهاتين الحكمتين.
The person for the first one was Desmond Tutu of South Africa. And I got to know him quite a few years ago. Under the Secretary of State created a group of what would you say? Not elders, but a group of people from different countries, a small group, and Sheikh Amozu was a member of it, but Desmond Tutu was also, and others. And I got to know him a bit. In fact, it turned out he would often be sitting sort of next to me. Although he had a great sense of humor, one time he walked into a meeting and he was a little late, and there was only one seat and it was next to me. And he said, "I have to sit with that person? I don't know about this, you know." But I admire that statement that you just read, because I think that is what life is about. And then the second one, repeat the second one for me.
Life shrinks or expands in proportion to one's courage.
Yeah, well, it's something that I guess I believe, but it's also something that an attitude that I like to think that I completely agree with, and that I faced myself in some ways, and everybody faces, you know, speaking out or doing certain things sometimes has a cost, in one way or another. And I think in our societies, we can talk about, for example, the wealthy class in the West, as well as, let's say, in the Muslim world. And we can say that, yes, many of them may be concerned, but many of them aren't really concerned at all, and they just pass on the money, the power, through their family or through their political party, etc. And certainly in today's world, on a lot of hot button issues, it's important where people can vote that they vote, and yet there are people who still don't vote. B, it's important that people speak out. C, it's important that people are willing to not only speak out, but to put their money where their mouth is. That is, if you speak out with your mouth, and you have some money to also, support whatever it is, a project for orphans, or a political candidate, or etc. I think that is a challenge in life that many face, and certainly particularly it comes at different stages. But younger people will do it in that some people will jump in and become aware of, let's say, social issues, and really, but others don't care at all. But still, others will be thinking, wait a minute. For example, now, if I speak out on campus or in class, if I go to this demonstration, etc., will that come back to bite me? And of course, the thing that reinforces that belief is that when you see that the leaders sometimes of some of our major universities are actually banning a Palestinian group and banning, going out of their way. And then when you get older, let's say, so you study, and let's say you're a member of the clergy, or you're a professor, or you're a business person, and you've got all of these ideas about social justice, as well as, it's great to make money, and good. Yeah, I want to make money, and I want to have a great career. But also, at a certain point, there can be instances where you kind of say, wait a minute, if you're in a corporation or wherever, do I speak out now? If I do, it could cost me my job. Or if I do, I might not lose my job, but it'll be very clear that I won't be favored when it comes to promotions, and that can haunt you all throughout your life, and that's why one of the things that I admire, I love statements like that. I also admire with media that we have now, and social media, etc. I admire the cross-section of people that you see who really do step up. Some of the people who are super wealthy and have committed themselves to the idea that in their lifetime, they're not going to hoard their money. They're going to, and so they wind up, Gates and others, many, but that their money actually enables them, along with a politician like, Jimmy Carter, who then would support these kinds of issues even when he was out of the presidency, to cure a disease in Africa, to, build up, devote a chunk of their money to building a program for women in their society, or for women who are abused in their society. I mean, all of those things I think are important. So I like these statements. The two I have there have to do with speaking out for your political right, as well as, I think, other rights.
في السؤال الأخير أستاذنا الفاضل، ما هي الإنجازات أو الأعمال البحثية التي أيضا تعكف على العمل عليها ولم تتسنى لك الفرصة بعد أن تنجزها، حبذا أن نختم بذلك.
Some projects that I have. I have a contract with Oxford University Press to write a book which is tentatively titled Encountering Islam and Muslims, but I may want to change the title at some point. It may be something. There was a book written with this title, and the author has now passed away, so I don't know, if I can also grab that title, which was Among the Believers, but and that is something where I would look at the span of my career from just before the Iranian Revolution to today, and talk about the phenomena that took place, but then to what extent was I involved at all? In other words, to introduce in that the extent to which, I was involved, engaged with this person or that person, or, this leader of a country, when 9/11 occurred, Biden invited me and Rami Corey to come and brief him, etc. He has not invited me, lest anybody start writing to me and saying, "Why can't you get in touch with President Biden and get him to change?" So that project is there. I want to see peace in Palestine very much, and I also have been doing a lot of work in the center, which created in '93. About 8 years ago, we created something called the Bridge Initiative, Protecting Pluralism, Ending Islamophobia. And it's because we just felt it had to be created. We have maybe 1.1 million followers on Facebook and other kinds of following, and we do programs. And, if people go to our website, which is just bridge.georgetown.edu, they can find all kinds of articles that reflect Islamophobia in religion, in politics, and in society. We look at all countries, to the extent that we do, and that remains a very big project for me, because I do believe, and I've written on Islamophobia before, published a book, but recently I have the new book coming out that I've done with a scholar named Sahar Aziz. And it's a collection done with scholars on different countries, but it's on the globalization of Islamophobia. And last year, I had the honor, or not honor, I was privileged to be able to be involved in putting together a program with Professor Imad Shaheen that we did in Doha. It was right at the anniversary, the first year of the UN and, fighting Islamophobia, with Baroness Warsi, who was the first woman to be in the House of Lords, Karen Armstrong, etc. And doing, really addressing the fact that we're not just talking about Islamophobia in a single country, and things have gotten worse rather than better. If you go and look at our website to see what has happened in Austria, the number of Muslims who were arrested, and it took 2.5 years for finally a judgment to come down saying the government had no right to do it, but who were arrested by police and military, who crashed into their homes in the middle of the night, etc. And you look at what's gone on in France. It's impossible to consider these countries and Britain, and the US. We see ourselves as developed countries, as progressive countries, as open countries. And yet, where are we? I just noticed that the EU court said that a country can prohibit a woman who wears a scarf from a job, but that it doesn't have to, but it's opened up the door for countries, like France and others, So that's an area that I'll continue to run. Our center will run a number of conferences, probably a conference almost every year on the globalization of Islamophobia. And then we also do a lot of what you're doing. We do a lot of programs interviewing people who've written books or articles or have been activists. I attribute it to my parents and to my mentor, Ismail al-Faruqi. I'm also the stereotype of an emotional Italian. Not all Italians are as emotional as I am on these kinds of issues, but it's just been, you know, an honor to have, you know, gotten into a field in which my colleagues said to me at the time, who were good friends, they were also professors of Catholic theology, as I was in the early days. They said, you'll never get a job. You know, why are you going into this abracadabra stuff? And also, I didn't mention this at that time. It wasn't until the mid 1980s, maybe about 84 to 86, when for the first time, the Foreign Service Institute actually introduced programs that dealt with religion, and particularly Islam in Southeast Asia, the Middle East, and the pop, you know, et cetera. So our diplomats who were going out all the time, and when the revolution took place also, there was almost no contact before of diplomats with any of the clergy in the country in any significant way, et cetera. None of this. So I was just really very, very lucky. I mean, I could have spent, if there hadn't been an Iranian revolution, I would have been happily teaching a small group of students wherever, but wouldn't have had some of the opportunities that I've had.